Big hello to everybody from Rosemary Armeo. You remember me, I hope. We've been on a summer break of sorts, only having brief chats over the last month. But beyond the brink and fighting back, our podcast is back for a whole new season. We're going to start it. We're going to start this season with what I hope you'll find as entertaining a discussion as I anticipate with Carle Kopecky. Carle was the director of the museum in Stone Fort in Schoharie for many years. You're kind of semi-retired now, but he's still a active history bug. He also knows about music. He plays 18th century musical instruments and can talk about that. But the reason I've invited him is that he has been a Revolutionary War reenactor for some time, since the Bicentennial, I think. Right. And he is a presence at reenactments of the many battles of the Revolution that hit in New York State, and also at protests. I've run into him at a few protests against the current administration, something about no kings that rings true. And I thought this would be amazingly appropriate as we come close to the 4th of July and the 250th anniversary of this country. It's a time when we all have been thinking about our founding because of what's happening with the Constitution and our protests. And you've been steeped, Carl, in the 1700s for longer than most of us. What are the lessons of the 1700s? Would a soldier, a citizen soldier from that time, recognize what we're protesting today?
Unfortunately, probably they would, and that's pretty scary for somebody who has been studying this since the 1970s, and the parallels are striking.
Okay, what parallels do you see?
Well,
Taxation without representation, Indian wars. What's the comparison between 1776 and now?
it's interesting that you mentioned a couple of those slogans, which of course, no taxation without representation was one of the complaints, but it was only one of them, and there were many uh, economic as well as political reasons for the American colonists to become frustrated with the British administration and eventually seek to become independent of the British Empire. And so a lot of those exist. There were intrusions of the parliamentary government from England into what had been the purview of the colonial assemblies in terms of levying taxes and meddling in local affairs, empowering the royal governors of the colonies to override the decisions and the actions of the assemblies that had been functioning relatively independently for many decades already, and and then there were the mercantile laws that were passed after the 7 Years' War, what's commonly known as the French and Indian War,
Okay.
um, which the government tried to get some reimbursement from the colonies for the cost of defending them from the French during that war, but they went about it in a very high-handed way, and they went about it following a mercantilist philosophy that was that the colonies were there purely to provide raw materials for the mother country, for Great Britain.
Right.
And so trade was restricted, manufacturing was restricted. A blacksmith who lived down the road from an iron foundry couldn't get wrought iron from that foundry to make whatever hardware he would normally make. That pig iron had to be shipped to England to be refined into wrought iron and then shipped back to the colonies for the blacksmith to buy it in order to make his products. It was an extremely restrictive system for what today we would call a small business or an entrepreneur.
Hmm.
These are the same kinds of issues that we're facing
There
today.
is a similarity where, as we are speaking, the Supreme Court has just ruled that the president has extraordinary powers that we've never seen a president exercise before. And so questions of states' rights and state authority in matters like elections and tariff and trade are all up in the air again. So it is similar.
In fact, I saw an article today that said that with his newfound ability to appoint and fire heads of congressionally mandated agencies, the president now has more arbitrary power than King George III had. All of
Wow.
his appointments had to be approved by Parliament.
By Parliament. Yeah. It is shocking. I want to veer off specifically into military history for a
Yes.
minute. And that, of course, is an area of great expertise and interest on your part. So, George Washington, one of the great leaders of our country, wonderful military leader and a model, he actually lost more battles than he won. So, what was the deal? What made him a great leader? And does Pete Hegseth have any of those characteristics?
Well, I can answer the second question first with a very simple no. Uh, but uh, but George Washington had a great feel for um, what was practical, what was important for the welfare of his troops and therefore his army, and so he managed to lose multiple battles without ever actually losing his army. He was always skilled at extracting them from a difficult situation in a number of ways. Sometimes because of his knowledge of military tactics, which were really not that sophisticated. He didn't have as much experience as other American officers had had. And partly it was his, uh, his background as a surveyor and as a farmer. In fact, uh, he was able to uh, recover from the uh, battle right after the Battle of Trenton. Uh, he was pursuing the British, and there was a small battle called the Battle of Assunpink Creek, where both sides bogged down. Washington was trying to get across this creek, which was difficult in those days for an army, and the ground was extremely muddy, and that was hampering the movement of the artillery and so on. And overnight, the wind shifted.
Hmm.
And Washington recognized that the shift of the wind as a farmer
Ah.
was heralding a change in temperatures, that temperatures were going to get colder. And he started his army in motion because he knew the mud was going to freeze and
Yeah.
he could get a head start on the British. That was the kind of common sense, kind of experience that he had,
Hmm.
almost uniquely because of his lifestyle before the war.
Would I asked you about a soldier coming back from the 1700s to now, what he would think of the country. Would he have any advice or lessons that he could teach soldiers or military leaders of today?
Well, I don't know if you're talking about a common soldier or an officer from the 18th century. Neither one of them, I don't think, would be able to offer much advice, especially to our own officer corps. They are extremely well trained at West Point in military history,
Hmm. Hmm.
um, uh, but they would be astounded at, first of all, the size of our permanent military establishment. You know, America was founded based on the citizen soldier, and when the
Right.
war was over, they'd all go home. There would be no standing army. And that was the attitude pretty much up until the War of 1812, when the burning of Washington convinced leaders that, you know what, we are going to need a bigger professional army. But the other thing I think that would be even more disturbing to a Revolutionary War soldier is the warrior culture that has developed and is encouraged, particularly right now within our military and within the society's attitudes toward the military. Again, those volunteer soldiers of the Revolutionary period, they didn't think of themselves as warriors. They were fighting for self-protection, self-preservation, fighting for a cause. But when the war was going to be over, they were going to go back to being farmers and merchants and tradesmen. This concept of it's a benefit to have to consider oneself a warrior and violence is a first reaction rather than a last one. I think that would be absolutely unbelievable to a Revolutionary War soldier, especially an American one.
That's pretty interesting. Do you think that liberty had a different meaning then that it does now? And I'm going to ask the same question about patriotism. Different then, different then than now?
Liberty at the time, I think, was the ability for the citizens of North America as well as uh, the colonies themselves to determine their own destiny, to be self-governing. And uh, today, it means different things to different people. Um, it means you know, I, I can, if it's not illegal for me to, uh, if you don't catch me driving my truck past the speed limit, then I'm at liberty to do it. And in some people's minds,
Mm.
personal liberty seems to be more important now than society uh, and
A
and
free
having
society. Right. I
yeah,
see
and
what
having to live with other people. I don't
Yeah.
care about my neighbors. It's all about me. Is an attitude that is very different regarding the word liberty.
Yeah, that's interesting. How about patriotism now? My country, no matter what, America first.
Well, of course, Nathan Hale, said my country, right or wrong, but right or wrong, my country. So there were those kinds of patriots in the 18th century, but the the word patriot was not used very much by the Americans of the time. They called themselves Americans.
Mhm.
And uh, when they did use a political label, it was very often to identify with the Whig Party in Parliament. The Whigs were the opposite of the Tories. The Tories were the King's Party. The Whigs were the Commons Party, and uh, the colors of the Whig Party at the time were dark blue and buff. And it's no coincidence that those are the colors that George Washington chose for his uniform,
Huh.
because there was a sizable part of the House of Commons who were sympathetic to the American cause. Um, so, so patriotism, if you translate it, it means love of the fatherland. That would be the British government,
Absolutely.
and so I don't really think they thought of themselves as patriots in the way that we do. They thought of themselves as Americans, as distinct from
English.
Britons.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's why I asked the question, and I think no colony was maybe as split among the people as New York, where it really was and people have said this, I'm not inventing it. The American Revolution in New York was essentially a civil war. There was a huge loyalist population. The Indian population had fought, as you've mentioned earlier, on the sides of the Brit. And many Americans felt that war was not necessary, a revolutionary war was not necessary, that we had to adjust our relations with Great Britain. Do you find any of that compelling? And again, I'm asking the question because I see such an echo in our divisions today among the people who thinks Trump is doing good things for the country and those who think he's just the worst president ever. That seems to me very similar to the 1700s.
It is. If you look at the polling numbers today and you look at the records from the 18th century, the divisions were just about 30% Tories and about 40% patriots, if you will, and a big chunk in the middle who really didn't want a
No,
war and didn't care
right,
one way or another. Just leave me alone and let me farm my farm.
right. It does sound familiar. You're right.
Yeah, yeah, it does. There were some parts of New York uh, that were extremely loyalist, while other parts were pretty uh, uh, pro-revolutionary.
They were
Uh,
hotbeds.
yeah,
Yeah.
and even so, regionally there were places that were more like a civil war. Westchester County was the most divided and the most violently divided. Um, but even among the Indians, the Iroquois were allied with the British during the French and Indian War, and the British counted on that alliance to continue. The but the Iroquois Confederacy, the Haudenosaunee, required that in relations with the outside, all Six Nations had to agree before they would do anything. And so both the Americans and the British sent envoys into the Haudenosaunee lands and tried to get them to take sides. And
Hmm.
one of the reasons they had survived so long was that they avoided taking sides whenever possible. Because when Indians got involved in white people's wars, they usually ended up on the losing end, no matter who was victorious. So the Haudenosaunee wanted to stay out of it, um, but it turned out that five of the Six Nations were persuaded to join the British cause. And the way that happened was that the British representative says, well, just tag along on this Mohawk Valley campaign and watch us defeat those Americans, and then you'll realize that we're the winning side. We're going to be the winning side. Unfortunately for the Confederacy, the Oneida Nation was very well integrated with the settlers along the Mohawk Valley in that particular area. They had said no. They said we don't want to join the war. They they tagged along with General Herkimer's forces to oppose the British coming down the Mohawk Valley. And when the shooting started, both sides started shooting back, and it ended up with Iroquois warriors shooting at other Iroquois warriors on both sides. The tragedy of that was it broke a political and military alliance among those Six Nations that had lasted for hundreds of years. So it was a civil war from the Native American point of view,
Right.
as well as the white settlers.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, I'm listening to you, Carl, and I'm thinking you're a historian, you've worked in museums all your life, you value the lessons of the past. Can you talk about why it's important for us to still be looking at the revolution? What are the lessons of that time for us now? Ken Burns, the documentarian, obviously feels the same. He did his big opus, his life's work was on the revolution this year. So he feels the same. It's so far away. Does it still have relevance to us today?
It absolutely does. I mean, we've talked about things that are relevant and comparable today already. What we learned during the bicentennial 50 years ago was by really studying the primary sources and adapting them into a living history approach to the celebration, was that a lot of what had been taught, a lot of what was basically accepted knowledge was really mythology. when we actually started trying to utilize the tactics of the time and trying out some of the things that were in the records but weren't common knowledge, we really realized we had to bust a lot of myths. First and foremost, the myth that the British were stupid to wear bright red uniforms and stand up in an open field while the clever Americans hid behind rocks and trees and shot at them with very accurate rifles. Those tactics did not work except at the very first battle, Lexington and Concord, when the Americans outnumbered the British by at least
Right.
3-1.
Right.
and not very few of them actually had rifles either. But we found out that the British tactics of standing in lines and firing those rapid fire single shot muskets, because they could fire 3 times faster than a rifle, uh, all in one direction, even though they were inaccurate. If you fired 50 muskets in the direction of the enemy, it's like a machine gun. Somebody's bound to hit something, as opposed to 10 or 20 guys with rifles trying to take aim and even though they could do so from a longer distance, it wasn't the way to drive the enemy off of the battlefield. And it wasn't until the Americans really got serious about learning and utilizing those linear warfare tactics, of course, in large part due to the training of Baron von Steuben, that we actually started winning battles. And that wasn't until the middle of the war. And so that's just one example of what some people at the time call, that's revisionist history. No, this is we read it, the documentation said it, we tried it out. We weren't actually shooting live ammunition at each other, but it turns out the most efficient way to move a large number of people from one place to another without confusion is to line them up and make them march. And then you can turn that column in any direction and deploy into a line of battle, and there's no confusion. Confusion causes panic, and panic causes defeat.
Interesting.
And so the British were using the right tactics. That's one example of what we could learn. But right now, it's still important because those myths persist. And they persist in large part for the advocates of the warrior culture and the so some people say it's the cowboy spirit, but it's also that American rifleman by himself with his trusty accurate rifle that beat the British. No, it wasn't. The myths persist, and so an anniversary like this makes people more willing to stop and take notice of a documentary.
Right.
And so, every 50 years we have to do it over again. That's another generation that needs to have a reality check.
And the lesson, that's fascinating. Have you watched the whole Ken Burns documentary? I need to ask that. It's
to admit that I didn't. I watched.
It's a little bit like homework, I have to say. It's really good, but it's like homework.
A lot of it already, so
yeah,
I learn things, and I do plan to continue watching it. But I did get distracted by some other things that were going on. But no, it's extremely well.
A few things going on in politics in today's time. This is Beyond the Brink and Fighting Back, and we are talking with Carle Kopecky, who is a longtime museum director. He's a historian, he's a music maker, and he's a Revolutionary War reenactor. Can you tell us, Carl, a little bit about how you got into reenacting, dressing up like a Revolutionary War soldier? I understand it's not such a very comfortable uniform, and what it's like to be a reenactor. What do you do?
Well, how I got into it actually was not directly related to the Bicentennial. When I was a teenager, when I was still in high school, my family became involved in World War I flying museum of World War I airplanes in Rhinebeck, New York. And we weren't pilots, we weren't airplane mechanics. My father and I were really enthusiastic about these old airplanes, though. And so my mother said, you know, we can, this is like a circus, this air show. And a circus has a band. And so she offered our services, the four of us as a family, as a German band for the air show. So we dressed in World War I style uniforms and played World War I music. And so it was a kind of a natural thing then when the Bicentennial was approaching, and I realized that there were these groups forming that were going to reenact the battles. Okay, now I'll go for a Revolutionary War uniform.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, my mother was an excellent seamstress, and and that's how I got started. Um, the what was striking to me most recently is the difference in the attitude of a lot of people. First of all, there were a lot more reenactors during the Bicentennial than there are today.
Mm-hmm.
Orders of magnitude more. People were just into it. They were so enthusiastic. The whole country was, really celebratory mood. And so, for instance, at the 200th anniversary of the crossing the Delaware and the
Right.
Battle of Trenton, there were little reenactment groups, companies of 4, 6 soldiers that were college students.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and they had just kind of gotten together and put together their impression and were there. Some of them were extremely accurate, some of them were not so good, but the enthusiasm was there, and they learned and they improved. And so uh, there's not that kind of universal enthusiasm as far as I see it today.
I
The,
was going to ask her about that. There's not the jubilation and the.
yeah.
I remember also back 25 years ago. I remember the bicentennial, and it was a big deal. It was all over the media. It was everybody was involved. Not so this time. Why is that? Is it just a matter of the numbers, the politics we have now? Not everybody's into UFC matches. What do you think?
Well, there are certainly a lot more choices and opportunities for people to spend their leisure time.
Yeah.
And reenacting is incredibly time consuming. Putting together your uniform and equipment and learning the drill and physically packing up all of your stuff and traveling to a battlefield for the weekend.
Yep.
It is a major commitment of time. Um, People have less free time than they did 50 years ago today because of the economy. People require two income households. Mom can't make
Yeah.
uniforms for the family. She's working a job as well, if not two. And so people have less free time. There are lots more activities for families and people in general to do interesting things, sporting events and all kinds of things. So
But
and
you didn't mention, Carl, that I said 25 years, actually 50 years ago, we're talking
yeah.
about the bicentennial. Um, Less love of country, less importance placed on the endurance of a country. You didn't mention any of those things,
No,
which
no.
is,
I think people are just as passionate about their country as they were 50 years ago, but for some reason they're their they don't respect each other's passion. Um, so it's one of the things that's interesting is that a lot of the people of the No Kings movement uh, congratulate me when I appear with my 13 star flag and say, yeah, we need to take our flag back
right.
because, it has been the political right that has been the big flag waving part of our society up until now. But the people on the left are just as patriotic. They love their country just as much as the people on the right, and both extremes need to recognize that.
Yeah. There's
And
there's a feeling among people on the left now that those people on the right can have January 6th. They can take that as their date, and we're going to take over July 4th. But again, it's so mean. You can just see the division right there. Both sides want to claim the flag now. It's this weird thing about patriotism. How do you show your passion for your country?
and to me, the flag itself is merely a symbol.
Uh-huh.
And again, historically, the flag had a purpose. It designated whose ship is this, whose government building is this. Where's the government building? Where's the post office? Where is the Capitol? That's the building that has a flag on it.
Yeah.
And who's in that fort? Well, you can tell by whose flag is
It's
flying.
on it.
It
Right.
was it was simply a method of communication, and that's another thing that has changed over the past 250 years, is that it has somehow become symbolic of all kinds of things.
Right.
And you can't deny that a lot of soldiers died fighting for the flag, but were they really? They were fighting for the country the flag represents. They were fighting for their homes and families.
Right. Right.
And
Ways of life and their towns. Yeah,
yeah,
right,
yeah. So,
absolutely.
but it belongs to all of us.
Yeah. I know that the left protests are all insisting now that no matter what your sign says, you should be carrying a flag in the other hand because they want to be recognized as
Yeah.
someone who believes that finding fault with how we're doing is part of being a patriot. You want to do better, you
Well,
know.
that's sure what Sam Adams and Thomas Paine thought.
That's right.
Yeah, they found fault with the government, and they decided to change it. And that's at least something that we all still believe in.
Carle Kopecky, a Revolutionary War reenactor, was there ever a moment during a reenactment that got to you emotionally, that made you feel, I don't know, the strength of these people, the integrity, the what they went through, or something else? I'm putting words in, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but made you feel like emotionally, wow, I know what it was like.
Well, we can never really know what it was like to have been in the past, but two examples come to mind.
Okay.
One was we actually spent a weekend in some of the cabins at Washington's encampment in Morristown, New Jersey, in the middle of the winter,
Oh,
and
wow.
and that was brutal. All the heat from the fire went up the chimney and didn't really heat the building, and it was and we only did it for one weekend, but that
Not for
gave
the
me
whole winter.
appreciation
Yeah.
for what the soldiers went through. The one that struck me most emotionally, however, was the 200th anniversary of the Battle of Monmouth.
Mhm.
And at that event, there were about 5,000 reenactors, if I recall correctly. And so the Americans were lined up on the edge of a tree line at the edge of a field, and the field had a slight hill in the middle of it. And so we're waiting for the British to advance. And pretty soon they did. And you saw their hats and their heads and their flags first. And then as they marched up over that hill, it was a really long line. And all of those red coats suddenly just rising up over that line, and that was the real wow. This must be what it felt like, and those guys aren't kidding around.
Wow. Yeah, the real fear and the danger was so prevalent. That's amazing. Uh, I admire that you do this. You get teased a lot. If the reenactors get teased a bit because of the realism that they insist on, but You're laughing. What are you
Yeah,
thinking of as you're laughing here?
yeah. Well, you know, yeah, the most of the groups now are extremely well researched, and
Yeah,
the
that's
members are really serious, and
right.
so there isn't the kind of freewheeling stuff that there was during the bicentennial, um, which makes it a little harder to get involved. Um, but the teasing is mostly very good natured, and
It is because people are fascinated by this stuff. I've
yeah,
watched it. Ticonderoga, those reenactments are draw crowds.
yes, yeah, and that's a good thing because there are still lessons to be taught, uh, and imaginations to be stimulated, and maybe inspire somebody to study history or get involved in politics because of what they learned about the Revolutionary War. So these activities are still very important. Personally, I don't do military anymore because unfortunately, one of the things I discovered in recent years was, again, a misunderstanding of what we were doing and why we were doing it, partly on the part of some of the reenactors, but certainly on the part of a good chunk of the audience. I remember having a guy come up to me at an event right up to my face and say, "Yeah, Second Amendment, that's what it's all about."
Ah,
And
interesting.
and I said, "Well, there were all kinds of economic." He just turned and walked away. Um, and I thought, are we really encouraging that kind of thinking?
Yeah.
And yeah, you know, again, it's anecdotal. It's just my impression, but it seems to me that a majority of the military reenactors today, no matter which side they're portraying now, would have been loyalists in
Ah,
1776.
interesting.
Yeah, and I don't like hanging around with those guys. So
So,
I said I'm going to start doing music instead. And when I go to an event, I go as a musician. I talk about the fact that it wasn't all fifes and drums and battles. Life went on, and here's a facet of the lifestyle of the 18th century, and I work economics into it. I talk about how my bassoon reeds have to be imported from France, but we can't trade with France. So the cane to make the bassoon reed has to be purchased by an agent in France, from Amsterdam, and then from Amsterdam, a British ship had to carry the cane to England to be loaded onto another British or American ship to be shipped to the colonies so that I could make a reed for my bassoon.
uh-huh.
And
Sounds
and
sounds like trade wars and tariffs and yeah, right.
absolutely, those were those economic constraints that
Sanctions, yeah.
drove us to the independence movement, and so I still get those lessons in, but I do it from a civilian point of view.
Do you get any feedback, bad feedback from fellow reenactors or family?
I've only encountered two or three reenactors at those events, at least in historic garb. And so, yeah, we're all self-congratulatory, glad to see each other. Very few. Um,
Interesting.
but the protesters love it. Oh my
Oh
gosh,
yeah.
I get
Yeah.
fist bumps and hugs, and just they're just so thrilled when I appear in uniform with my 13 star flag, to which I've added a "No Kings Since 1776" banner.
Yeah, well, that's a metaphor that, of course, the protesters, the left protesters, have
you know,
really
and
embraced,
then the
and you
guys drive by
embody
in their pickup trucks and holler, "You ought to be ashamed!" But
it.
you know.
So we're talking, let me remind listeners or telling people who are just coming in for the first time, this is Carle Kopecky. He is a historian and a museum a director, former director, and a protester sometimes against the current administration. Um, would that have happened in the 17th century? Did soldiers then protest what was going on? Again, there was a division between the loyalists and the colonists who wanted to be separate. Did the soldiers get involved in any of that politics, or were they kept out of it? Communications and everything were so different then, you
Well,
know?
the protesting turned into a war. So,
Well, okay, that's
yeah.
that's obviously a good point.
However, the uh, uh, several regiments of the Continental Line in the winter of 1780-81 mutinied against their officers and organized to march on Philadelphia to demand their back pay and better rations because there was an extreme food shortage. And uh, they didn't get to Philadelphia. A couple of other regiments were organized to stop them, and the organizers were a few of the organizers were harshly punished, but uh, yeah, that revolutionary
Yeah.
protest attitude. They're not paying us what they promised. We're hungry. We're cold. We're going to go down to Congress and tell them what we think about this situation. And that was at least two regiments of the Continental Line that were going to march on Congress.
Wow. So I've been asking the questions. Tell us now briefly what you think people should know about or think about the Revolutionary War as you've studied it.
Well, first of all, it lasted 7 years. A lot of people think, Washington crossed the Delaware and then Cornwallis surrendered at Yorktown the next year. Um, there were 5 years of fighting in between those events, 5 6 years. The war wasn't over till 1783. So the privations and the hardships that were endured by the soldiers, by the civilians, the British blockaded the American coast, so there were a lot of manufactured goods and items, tea among them, that Americans did without during the course of the war. So it wasn't, let's go fight the British and kick them out. It was a long, drawn out process. And the other thing was that there were American sympathizers in the House of Commons, in Parliament, even in the House of Lords to a much lesser extent. But Commons was relatively powerless when it came to foreign affairs
Right.
at at that
Sounds
time.
familiar too.
It was the House of Lords that appointed all the foreign ministers, where they all came from, and the oversight of foreign affairs was the king and his ministers. Most of them were aristocracy, and so Congress was set up. So originally it was the only government that we had, and then when the Constitution, when it became clear that we really did need some kind of an executive as well, um, the danger now is that, like Parliament in the 18th century, Congress is losing its ability to check and balance, as it were, the administration and the military. Um, the military situation again with the way this, you know, Congress set up, the framers of the Constitution set up the military um, with the belief that it would only be a very small force and that it would only be used defensively. Um, but they pretty much left the military, especially after the establishment of the military academies, uh, to develop their own methodologies, their own code of ethics, their own way of conducting warfare. Uh, However, they believe that ultimate control by the civilian
Right.
part of the government was necessary to prevent a military leader from getting out of control.
Yeah.
And imagine that the civilian person entrusted with overseeing the military was going to be the one that wanted to take over and install his own incompetent officials at the top, fire some of the top
The
generals
generals.
and
Yeah.
put in place people that that would do his bidding.
One of
So
one of the many nasty surprises we've gotten recently. Yep,
yeah, yeah, my God, and that's that's one of the aspects of, again, of liberty. If there's no law against it, I can do it,
can do it
and if
right.
nobody stops me, I can do it.
Right.
And
That's where we are.
now we
I
have to
and
start
that
writing everything down.
that that brings us, we're running out of time, but I do have a last question. I would be remiss not to ask this. The next 250 years, are you optimistic, or are you of the camp that we're seeing the end of our democracy? What do you feel?
50-50 at this point.
Wow.
I'll let you know after the November elections. Actually, I'll let you know after January. But yeah, we are really at a tipping point, and not just in this country, because there are authoritarian regimes all over the world uh, that um, that threaten the same kinds of things. The problem is now we are not living on an isolated continent with an ocean between us and our enemies. We're all part of the world. We are all environmentally and politically and militarily entangled with one another in ways that we can't isolate ourselves. So we've got to learn to get along. And that's either under an authoritarian rule by strong men in different parts of the world, or a more democratic system has to become the norm rather than the exception. And so, our government has been called an experiment in democracy ever since it was created. That experiment's still going on, and I can't guarantee what the next 250 years will look like.
Wow. We traditionally close our podcast with a toast, and I'm raising my glass today, of course, to America. Happy birthday, and I hope you make it.
I do too. Here, here.